All right, that's enough body rock. Let's break dance over to the best of the bunch. This week's best of the bunch is Manhunter. Now this is an older picture. This is one coming to us from the 80s, and it is an all-time favorite of mine that I revisited recently, and I'm super excited to say that it is still tremendous. Directed by the great Michael Mann, Manhunter is, if you would probably know it better by the name Red Dragon, because that's what they remade it as. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, friends. So Manhunter is an adaptation of the Thomas Harris novel Red Dragon, which is the first of the Hannibal Lektor novels. Now, this movie came out well before Silence of the Lambs, and is the first Hannibal Lektor movie. It was later remade by, I think, Brett Ratner as Red Dragon. But the movie we're talking about is Manhunter, the first attempt at all of this. I would say it's the best of the Lektor movies. I love it a lot. In this one, we don't have Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lektor. Instead, we have Brian Cox playing Hannibal Lektor, and Brian does a tremendous job. His Lektor is very different from Anthony Hopkins. Hopkins plays him as, very refined and intelligent, while Brian Cox brings a much more reptilian and predatory sense to Lektor in the very few Lektor scenes. Lektor is very much a side supporting character in this. You call this a Hannibal Lektor movie because Hannibal Lektor is such a big character, but it's not a Hannibal Lektor movie. He certainly doesn't headline. He's certainly not the bad guy. No, instead this movie follows the detective who's trying to track down a serial killer. The detective's played by Tom Noonan. And Tom had, prior to this movie, just caught Lektor and gone to some very dark places in his own psyche to do so. Now he's been called out of retirement to try and solve another murder, this one being committed by a guy called the Tooth Fairy. Here's the deal. This is a great movie. It's very stylish. Michael Mann bathes this whole thing in neon and synth. He also wisely turns it into a procedural, so that most of this movie is following the detective. The character's name is Will Graham. Following him as he tracks down the Tooth Fairy, using Lektor to do so. Getting Lektor to sort of bait the Tooth Fairy from behind bars a little bit, but at the same time, Graham has to sort of start to try and see things the way the killer would in order to catch him. It's super stylish. I love the procedural elements. There's a particularly great sequence that I think a lot of viewers would find boring, wherein they discover a letter written on toilet paper by the Tooth Fairy to Hannibal Lektor in Lektor's cell. They grab it and then they run it through this whole barrage of tests at the police laboratory where they're like x-raying it and bathing it in UV and trying to figure out where it's from and who sent it, that I find very exciting. The other great part of this movie is Joan Allen. Joan isn't in it a lot, but she plays a blind woman who works in the same development laboratory as our archvillain, the Tooth Fairy. And she goes out on a date with him, wherein we find out that the Tooth Fairy is maybe a little bit redeemable. He takes her out on this great date where he takes her to a zoo veterinarian's office, and she gets to pet and feel a sedated tiger, which, just those sort of textures and the power. Alan plays it so well where you can get the sense of how amazing that would be, not just for you or I, but for a blind person to be able to feel all of that and have those sensations. She's great in the movie, and she's great when the killer ultimately turns against her, as you would expect. This is a tremendous, suspenseful, and stylish movie. If you've never seen it, if you've only seen Silence of the Lambs and its sequels, I really think you owe it to yourself to go back and check out Manhunter. It is a tip-top movie for me, and I'm giving it 5 stars.